The underestimation. The galaxy had always seen Earth as a small, insignificant planet, nothing special compared to the vast, advanced civilizations that spanned the stars. To the aliens, humanity was just a primitive species, crawling on a single planet, far behind in terms of technology and military might. But there was one thing they didn't account for: the human spirit. And that spirit was about to turn the tables. The Imperial fleet, one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, had been given the task of dealing with Earth. They were tasked with crushing humanity's last hope, a ship designed to fail. The aliens knew they had the upper hand. The ship, the Dawn's Edge, was supposed to be humanity's ultimate test. It was old, slow, and barely had the firepower to defend itself. The ship's technology was nothing compared to the sleek, powerful vessels of the Imperial fleet. The humans, who had been through countless defeats and struggles, weren't supposed to be a threat. The aliens had been watching Earth for years, and they knew the human race had little to no chance of surviving against the galactic might of the Empire. But they underestimated one key element: the humans didn't give up. Even when the odds were stacked against them, they fought with everything they had. On the eve of the battle, the crew of the Dawn's Edge stood at the ready. They weren't warriors from some elite military force. They were survivors, people who had lived through the worst the universe had to offer. Their ship was far from perfect, and many of the crew members weren't even trained soldiers. They were civilians, engineers, scientists, and young recruits who had only recently been thrown into a war they had never imagined. Yet in their eyes, there was a fire that couldn't be extinguished by fear or doubt. Captain Sarah Bennett, the commander of the Dawn's Edge, looked out over the crew. Her mind raced, but her face remained calm. She had faced adversity all her life and had learned that nothing was impossible if you were willing to fight for it. The aliens may have thought they had the upper hand, but Sarah knew that humans had one thing the invaders could never understand: determination. "I know we don't have the best ship," Captain Bennett said, her voice steady, "but we got something far more powerful: the will to fight for what's ours. This ship may be old, but we're not, and we're not going down without a fight." Her words echoed in the small control room. The crew members nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of fear and excitement. They knew the odds were against them, but they were ready to face whatever came next. They had no choice. In the Imperial Fleet's command center, Admiral Korath watched the humans' preparations with a smirk. He had seen this before: weak, primitive races trying to fight back against overwhelming force. They would fall, just like the others. It was almost laughable how Earth's leaders thought they could win. The Imperium's flagship, the Devastator, was a massive ship, bristling with weapons and shield generators. It was a symbol of the Empire's strength. Korath was confident that Earth's defenses would crumble within hours. The humans had no chance against such a force. The Devastator alone could wipe out the Dawn's Edge without breaking the sweat. The fleet surrounding them would make sure of that. But as Korath prepared to give the command to launch the attack, something caught his attention. He noticed the human ship was moving strangely, almost as though it was testing its limits. The crew seemed focused, determined. Korath dismissed it as a last-ditch effort to intimidate, but deep down, a small doubt began to form. He quickly pushed the thought aside. "They're nothing," he muttered to himself. "A broken ship and a broken people. They will fall." The Devastator moved into position, and the rest of the fleet followed suit. The humans had no idea what was coming. The battle was about to begin, and it would be quick. The Imperial fleet would crush them, and the galaxy would finally be rid of Earth's nuisance. But unbeknownst to Korath, the humans were already preparing for something far greater than he could ever have imagined. Sarah Bennett and her crew might have had a ship that was supposed to fail, but they had something else. They had a relentless drive to survive. They had the will to fight, not just for their lives, but for the future of their planet. As the Devastator raised its weapons and fired, the humans aboard, The Dawn's Edge braced for impact. But they didn't cower. They didn't give up. Instead, they did what humans always did when the odds were against them. They fought back with everything they had. The first few moments of the battle were chaotic. Blasts from the Imperial fleet's weapons shook the human ship, but the Dawn's Edge held strong. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't equipped to handle such a powerful force. But Sarah had prepared her crew for this. The ship's outer armor absorbed the blows, while the crew focused on what they could do. Every maneuver was calculated, every attack precise. They didn't need to win. They just needed to survive long enough to turn the tide. To the aliens, it was a surprise. They had expected a quick victory, but the humans weren't breaking as easily as they thought. And that small shift in the battle was enough to begin rewriting history. The unexpected resistance. The battle between the Imperial fleet and the human ship, the Dawn's Edge, had begun. The first few moments were a blur of flashing lights, explosions, and the deafening roar of weapons. Yet, amidst the chaos, something unexpected was happening. Something the aliens did not account for. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't panicking. They were fighting back. Admiral Korath watched in disbelief as the human ship managed to evade the first wave of attacks. His eyes narrowed as he observed the tactics unfolding before him. The humans were outmatched, their ship inferior in every way. It was meant to be a symbolic gesture, a test to show the weakness of Earth. But here they were, still standing, still moving, and most importantly, still fighting. In the Imperial fleet's command center, the crew shifted uneasily. Korath could feel the tension rising. The humans had managed to avoid several direct hits, and their ship seemed to be getting stronger with every move. The Devastator's massive cannons unleashed another barrage of fire, but once again, the Dawn's Edge was able to dodge or deflect the attacks. The humans were adapting faster than anyone expected. Korath slammed his fist onto the control panel, his face a mixture of frustration and anger. "How are they doing this?" he growled. The data on his screen suggested that their shields should have been long gone by now, but the human ship was still holding strong, and its crew seemed unshaken. He couldn't understand it. Meanwhile, aboard the Dawn's Edge, Captain Sarah Bennett remained calm as she watched the battle unfold. She knew that every second counted. They couldn't take many more hits, but she also knew that this was their only chance. The Imperium had underestimated them, and now they had to make sure the aliens paid the price. "Keep steady, everyone," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is just the beginning. Stay focused." Her words grounded the crew, many of whom had never imagined they would be in this position. Earth had always been seen as a weak, vulnerable target. And yet, here they were, standing their ground against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Sarah's mind raced. She had trained for countless missions, but this wasn't just about military tactics. It was about survival. They had no choice but to push forward. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders, and they couldn't afford to fail. The ship's engines hummed as the crew worked tirelessly to keep it running. The Devastator's attacks were intense, but the human ship's shield systems, though outdated, were holding up far better than expected. It was clear that the aliens had never considered the possibility that Earth's technology might have hidden strengths. In the heart of the battle, Lieutenant Mark Tiller, one of Sarah's most trusted officers, stood at his station, watching the ship's scanners. His brow furrowed as he tracked the enemy fleet's movements. "They're coordinating their attacks," he muttered, "but we're dodging them faster than they can track us." Sarah's heart raced as she listened to his analysis. "Good," she said. "Let's use that against them." At that moment, the aliens made their first big mistake. They sent in their smaller, faster ships, believing they could outmaneuver the Dawn's Edge. But the human crew had been preparing for this. As the smaller ships closed in, the crew activated the ship's hidden weapon systems the aliens hadn't anticipated. The Dawn's Edge unleashed a series of precise, targeted blasts that struck the smaller ships with deadly accuracy. In an instant, the human ship had taken out 2 enemy vessels. The aliens were stunned. Their arrogance had led them to believe that humanity was no threat. Now, that belief was shattering. Admiral Korath watched as the 2 ships exploded in a burst of flames. His jaw tightened. What just happened? He whispered under his breath. The data he was receiving didn't make sense. The humans had struck with a force that shouldn't have been possible for a ship like the Dawn's Edge. For the first time since the battle had begun, Korath felt a twinge of doubt. He hadn't expected this. The humans were fighting back with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. And it was working. The Imperial fleet began to shift their tactics. No longer did they believe the humans were easy prey. They began to focus their fire on the Dawn's Edge, launching concentrated attacks on the ship's shields and trying to breach its defenses. But every attack only fueled the humans' resolve. For every blast the aliens sent, the crew of the Dawn's Edge responded with fierce determination. On the bridge, Sarah knew that the battle was far from over, but she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They were still standing. They had just destroyed 2 of the enemy ships. And they were learning. Every minute that passed, every hit they took, made them stronger. They were proving the galaxy wrong. Humanity was not weak. And they were not going to fall without a fight. "Keep up the pressure," Sarah ordered. "We're not giving them an inch." The battle raged on, and the humans, with their ship that was meant to fail, were slowly rewriting the history of the galaxy. As each moment passed, the Imperial fleet realized more and more that they had made a grave mistake. Underestimating Earth and its people was going to cost them dearly. The unexpected turnaround. The battle between the Dawn's Edge and the Imperial fleet continued to escalate. The once confident Imperial forces now found themselves in a desperate struggle, their superior numbers and advanced technology no longer ensuring an easy victory. The Dawn's Edge had become more than just a symbol of defiance. It was proving to be a formidable adversary. On the bridge, Captain Sarah Bennett stood firm, watching the chaos unfold. Her heart pounded with every impact the ship endured, but her mind was focused. They were on the brink of achieving the impossible. For all the Imperial fleet's might, they hadn't anticipated humanity's relentless drive to survive. And they hadn't anticipated the ship's crew, their ingenuity, their teamwork, and their unyielding determination. "We're holding them off, Captain," Lieutenant Mark Tiller called out from his station, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The Imperial fleet is starting to pull back, but they're regrouping for another assault." Sarah nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the tactical display. The aliens were regrouping, but so were they. This wasn't just about holding out. It was about finding a way to strike back. Every moment of survival was a moment to learn, to adapt, and to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. "We can't afford to wait," Sarah said, her tone unwavering. "Let's make them regret underestimating us." The crew worked in perfect unison as they prepared to shift tactics. The enemy fleet was large, but their ships were beginning to falter. Every time they tried to concentrate their fire on the Dawn's Edge, the humans responded with cunning evasions and precise counterattacks. What had once seemed like a hopeless defense was now a calculated counteroffensive. Elsewhere in the Imperial fleet, Admiral Korath watched the situation deteriorate. His ships were taking heavy damage, and his pride was beginning to crack. The human ship wasn't supposed to be able to fight back. It was supposed to be a weak target, a token show of power to reinforce the Empire's dominance. Yet, here they were, struggling to keep the human ship at bay. The smug confidence that had once dominated Korath's mind began to fade, replaced by frustration and disbelief. "Why won't they break?" he muttered to himself as his fingers hovered over the command console. "How are they still standing?" His officers remained silent, unsure of how to answer. They had never encountered an enemy like this. The humans were proving to be a far more formidable foe than anyone could have predicted. Meanwhile, back on the Dawn's Edge, Sarah could sense the shift in the air. The alien fleet had hesitated, And that hesitation was exactly what she needed. It was time for them to take the fight to the Imperial fleet, and she knew just how to do it. "Prepare to launch the counterattack," Sarah ordered. Her voice was calm, but filled with resolve. The crew had been waiting for this moment, and now they would make it count. The humans were no longer merely surviving. They were becoming the ones in control of the battle. The crew swiftly initiated a new strategy, hitting the enemy where it hurt. Using a combination of evasive maneuvers and well-timed strikes, they began to cripple the Imperial fleet's forward forces. The smaller, faster ships of the Imperium, which had once appeared so confident, now found themselves outclassed by the humans' tactical brilliance. As the first of the enemy ships exploded in a burst of fire, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The Imperial fleet hadn't seen it coming. The humans had flipped the script. The weak ship that they had intended to destroy was now dealing damage to their fleet. The Galaxy would never forget what was happening today. "Direct hit, Captain," Lieutenant Tiller shouted, his voice ringing with excitement. "We've disabled their forward cruiser. We've got them on the back foot now." Sarah didn't let the moment get to her. They had a long way to go before victory was assured. But for the first time since the battle began, she allowed herself to believe that it was possible. The impossible was becoming reality. And they were doing it. The battle raged on, but now, the Imperial fleet was no longer the predator. It was the prey. The humans had turned the tables, and there was no turning back. The aliens had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. In the depths of the Imperial fleet's command center, Admiral Koraf's frustration boiled over. He could hear the chaos in the background as his officers scrambled to regain control of the situation. The humans weren't backing down. In fact, they were getting stronger with every passing moment. And this time, it wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about rewriting the rules of war. "Order all ships to focus fire on the Dawn's edge. Do not let them escape," Koraf ordered, his voice shaking with anger. "We cannot let these creatures think they've won." But despite his orders, the Imperial fleet was faltering. The humans had struck with a force and cunning that no one had expected. And even as the alien fleet prepared for another round of attacks, one thing was becoming clear: the tide had turned. The battle was no longer about who was weaker. It was about who was more determined to survive. And on that day, humanity was proving that they would never back down. The turning tide. The fierce clash between the humans and the Imperial fleet intensified. In the midst of the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. The tide was slowly turning in favor of the humans. What had started as a desperate defense was now evolving into a full-fledged counteroffensive. The once overconfident Imperial fleet was now beginning to falter under the relentless determination of the human crew aboard the Dawn's Edge. Captain Sarah Bennett stood tall at the command center, her sharp eyes scanning the situation. The energy on the bridge was palpable. Every crew member was fully invested in the battle. The Imperial fleet, which had once seemed like an unstoppable force, was now struggling against the humans' ingenuity and adaptability. The underdog had become the hunter. "We've got them on the run," Lieutenant Mark Tiller reported, his voice tense but filled with a hint of disbelief. "Their formations are breaking apart. They're retreating toward the outer edges of the system." Sarah didn't let herself get carried away by the moment. She knew the battle wasn't over yet. The Imperial fleet was still a formidable enemy, and they wouldn't simply roll over. "Stay focused, everyone. This is our chance to finish what we started," she said, her voice firm with authority. "Prepare the next wave of counterattacks." Her words were met with a chorus of affirmation from the crew. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about proving that humanity could overcome the impossible. They had taken the weakest ship in the Imperial fleet and turned it into a symbol of resistance. But now, they needed to finish the fight. The tactical officers worked furiously, setting up the next phase of the counteroffensive. On the view screen, The Imperial fleet was starting to regroup, but there was a crack in their armor, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. The humans' resilience was beginning to break their resolve. Meanwhile, Admiral Korath sat in his command chair, his face a mask of frustration and fury. The situation had deteriorated faster than he could have imagined. He had been certain that the humans, with their so-called weak ship, would have been crushed by the sheer might of the Imperial fleet. But instead, they had pushed back, hard. Every strike, every maneuver, seemed to throw his fleet into disarray. "Status report," Korath barked, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We're losing ships, sir," one of his officers replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "The human ship is relentless. We cannot get a clear shot at it. Their tactics are unpredictable. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before." Korath slammed his fist against the armrest of his chair. "No, we will not lose to these creatures." His eyes narrowed. "Increase firepower on the human ship. We need to destroy it, or we risk losing everything." Back on the Dawn's Edge, Sarah could see the Imperial fleet beginning to focus all their fire on her ship. The attacks were more concentrated now, but the crew had been preparing for this. Their ship might have been the weakest in the fleet, but it was far from defenseless. Every corner of the ship had been reinforced, every weapon calibrated for maximum effectiveness. "We need to move now," shouted Lieutenant Tiller as an explosion rocked the ship's hull. The blast wasn't severe, but it was enough to shake the crew's resolve. "They're coming at us with everything they've got." Sarah nodded. "Brace for impact, but hold your ground." Her voice remained calm, even as the ship trembled under the onslaught. "We've trained for this. We know what we're doing." In the midst of the chaos, the human crew began executing maneuvers that the Imperial fleet could not predict. Their attacks were unconventional, tactical decisions made in the heat of the moment, based on instinct and pure human creativity. The Dawn's Edge darted through space with surprising agility, evading most of the Imperial blasts. They weren't just surviving. They were outsmarting the enemy. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Tiller shouted. "We've disabled one of their cruisers." "Good work, Lieutenant. Keep up the pressure. We need to keep them off balance." Sarah's face was set in determination, a fierce light in her eyes. The humans were no longer playing defense. They were on offense, fighting back with everything they had. Despite their best efforts, the Imperial fleet couldn't keep up. The humans were no longer the underdog. They were the force to be reckoned with. As the battle raged on, the humans began to notice the shift. The Imperial fleet's once perfect formations had crumbled. Ships were starting to fall back, and their firepower was weakening. The humans had found their rhythm, and the Imperial fleet had underestimated them in the worst way. Back in the Imperial command center, Korath's face darkened as he saw his fleet's retreat. His pride had been shattered. "Fall back to the backup position," he ordered, trying to salvage what little control he had left. "We will not be defeated by these humans." But Sarah Bennett knew it was only a matter of time before the Imperial fleet realized their mistake. Humanity had proven itself on the battlefield, and the Imperium's grip on the galaxy was weakening. The humans had made their mark, and there was no going back. The tide of battle had shifted, and this time, the galaxy would never forget who the true masters of survival were. The war was far from over, but this moment had changed everything. And Sarah Bennett and her crew knew it was just the beginning of something much larger, something the galaxy had never seen before. The reckoning. The battle between humanity and the Imperial fleet had entered a crucial phase. Despite the intense pressure, the Dawn's Edge had survived, and the tide was shifting in favor of the humans. But as the Imperial fleet regrouped, the true test of humanity's resilience was about to begin. Captain Sarah Bennett stood on the bridge of her ship, eyes narrowed, analyzing the Imperial fleet's movements. They were circling, hesitant, as though waiting for something. It wasn't just about the military might anymore. It was about something much more profound. something the Imperial fleet had never expected. The humans' unbreakable will. "We need to finish them now," Lieutenant Tiller said quietly, his gaze glued to the view screen, where the retreating ships of the Imperium were slowly regrouping. "We can't let them re-establish their defenses. Once they do, they'll have the advantage again." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I know, but we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're showing them who we are." She understood that this battle was no longer about technology, strategy, or firepower. It was about something far deeper: humanity's strength of spirit. The humans had been underestimated, written off as weak and insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But they had proven their worth with every maneuver, every blast of their weapons, and every inch of ground they gained. The Imperium was learning a valuable lesson. The humans weren't just survivors, they were warriors. On the other side of the battlefield, Admiral Korath was furious. The once mighty Imperial fleet, which had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, was now battered and retreating. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had turned a failed ship into a weapon of war. The ship that had been destined for destruction had become the symbol of humanity's defiance. His officers whispered among themselves, a growing sense of panic among them. Korath slammed his fist against the console, sending a shockwave of tension through the room. "I will not be humiliated by these creatures," he growled. "Reinforce the front lines. We must crush them before they can regroup." But Korath's commands were no longer as certain as they once were. His fleet had been thrown into disarray by the human resistance, and morale was crumbling. The thought that humans, who had once been considered nothing more than primitives, could challenge the might of the Imperium was almost too much to bear. Back on the Dawn's Edge, Sarah knew that the final confrontation was looming. The Imperium was cornered, and they were about to make their last stand. But this time, the humans wouldn't just be fighting to survive, they would be fighting to win. They had already turned the battle around, and now they had to finish what they started. "Prepare the weapons for a full assault," Sarah ordered, her voice cold and steady. "We're going to take the fight to them. No mercy." The crew sprang into action, ready to unleash everything they had. Every weapon system was primed, every shield generator set to maximum. The humans were no longer the underdog. They were the ones in control. As the Dawn's Edge moved into position, Sarah felt a sense of determination surge through her. This wasn't just about victory. It was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. The Imperium had underestimated them, and now the consequences of that mistake would be felt across the stars. Meanwhile, Admiral Korath's ship was fully prepared for the final engagement. His fleet had pulled itself together, but the damage was done. The humans had shattered their confidence, and now they were faced with a relentless, unpredictable enemy. Korath could no longer count on brute force to win this battle. His pride was on the line. "Engage the humans with everything we've got," Korath shouted, his voice strained with desperation. "This ends today." The two forces collided with a deafening roar, the stars around them lighting up in a burst of energy. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the human ship, small and seemingly insignificant, moved with terrifying agility, dodging and weaving through the Imperial fire like a predator in the dark. The humans had learned to fight with their wits, and now they were using that knowledge to their advantage. The Imperial fleet was no longer the fearsome force it once was. Every blow they struck seemed to miss. Every tactic they tried failed. The humans, despite their supposed disadvantages, were more than holding their own. They had turned their weaknesses into strengths, and as the Imperial fleet watched in disbelief, the Dawn's Edge continued to strike at their heart. Sarah watched as one of the Imperial flagship's massive cruisers exploded in a burst of light, its hull rupturing from the relentless attacks. The human crew cheered, but Sarah remained focused, never allowing herself to be distracted by the victory. There was still work to be done. "We've got them on the ropes," Lieutenant Tiller said, his voice full of excitement. "One more push, Captain. We can finish this." Sarah looked at the view screen, where the Imperium's fleet was breaking apart. Their retreat had begun in earnest, but this time there would be no mercy. "We're not letting them escape," she said coldly. "We end this now." With a final, decisive push, the human fleet launched everything they had at the retreating Imperial forces. The energy from their weapons surged across space, and within moments, the Imperial fleet was in full retreat, with dozens of ships disabled or destroyed. The battle was over. The humans had won. But as Sarah stood at the helm of her ship, she knew that this victory was just the beginning. The galaxy would never forget the day that humans, armed with nothing more than determination and a single weak ship, had rewritten the fate of the stars. And no one would ever underestimate them again. The shifting balance. The dust from the battlefield had barely settled, but the victory was already reverberating across the galaxy. The Imperium had retreated in disgrace, their once uncontested dominance shattered by a single human ship, a vessel that had been written off as weak and unworthy. The humans had shown the galaxy a lesson that would echo throughout the stars. Never underestimate them. Captain Sarah Bennett stood on the bridge of the Dawn's Edge, her eyes scanning the view screen. The aftermath of the battle had left a trail of destruction, but there was something else in the air, something electric. The Imperial fleet had been defeated, but the consequences of that defeat were far-reaching. "Report," she said, her voice steady, commanding. Lieutenant Tiller was already at his station, his fingers flying across the console. "We've got some damage to repair, but nothing we can't handle. We've taken down most of their flagship fleet, but some of their smaller ships are still in retreat." Sarah nodded. It was expected. The Imperium had been too proud, too confident in their own power. Now, they were running, and the humans had proven that they could be far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the Imperium that had taken notice. News of the humans' victory was spreading like wildfire. Across the galaxy, from the most peaceful planets to the most militaristic factions, people were talking about the battle. The words Earth and humans were on everyone's lips, spoken with a mix of awe, fear, and curiosity. The Imperium had underestimated them, and now their failure was a cautionary tale. Sarah turned to her crew, a tight smile on her lips. "We've just rewritten history, people. No one will ever look at Earth the same way again." The crew cheered. They had done it. They had defeated one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy, and now the universe would remember them as the species that had shown everyone what true resilience looked like. But Sarah knew it wasn't over. The Imperium would lick their wounds and return eventually, but they would never forget the humiliation of this defeat. "We're not done yet," Sarah continued, her voice firm. "This is just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead of us." Across the stars, the Imperium was in turmoil. Admiral Korath, once one of the most feared leaders in the galaxy, was now pacing angrily in his command chamber. The human fleet had dealt a blow to his pride that he could never have anticipated, and the consequences of his failure were enormous. "The humans, they did the impossible," Korath muttered to himself. "How did they turn that ship into such a weapon?" His officers stood around him, quiet and uneasy. They had never seen Korath like this. The Admiral's calm, authoritative demeanor had always been a hallmark of his leadership, but now his confidence was shaken. "The humans are not what we thought," he said finally, turning to face his officers. "We underestimated them, and we paid the price. But this is not over. They may have won this battle, but we will return, and when we do, we will make sure they know their place." His officers nodded, a mix of unease and determination in their expressions. They knew their next steps would be crucial if they wanted to recover from the crushing defeat, but they also understood that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. The humans had shown that they were capable of far more than anyone had imagined. Back on Earth, the aftermath of the battle was still unfolding. News of the victory had spread to every corner of the globe. People celebrated, their spirits lifted by the triumph of their forces. But amidst the celebrations, a sense of uncertainty lingered. The world had seen how fragile the peace could be. If the Imperium, a galactic power beyond their wildest imagination, could be defeated by humanity, what would come next? Would others take note of Earth's strength? Would new threats rise to challenge them? In the bustling streets of cities across the world, leaders and citizens alike debated these questions. But despite the uncertainty, there was a shared understanding that humanity had crossed a threshold. They had proven they were capable of defending themselves against the greatest forces in the galaxy, and no matter what came next, they would be ready. President Elena Rivera stood before the United Nations Assembly, her voice steady as she addressed the gathered leaders. "We have faced an enemy that thought they could conquer us, but we have shown them that humanity is not to be trifled with. This victory is not just ours, it's the galaxy's. The message is clear. Earth will not be taken lightly. We are no longer just survivors. We are warriors." There was a quiet murmur of agreement among the assembly, but President Rivera's face was grim. She knew this victory was just the beginning. The Imperium would return, and other powers would take note of Earth's strength. The galaxy would now be watching them, and humanity's place in the universe was about to change forever. As Sarah Bennett stood on the bridge of the Dawn's Edge, she couldn't help but think about the future. The victory over the Imperium had made her people proud, but she also knew that they had opened a door. The humans had proven their strength, but now they would be faced with the challenge of maintaining their place in the galactic order. Back on Earth, the world was still in celebration. The news of the victory had spread far and wide. Citizens cheered in the streets, hoisting flags and banners with Earth's emblem. People embraced their newfound pride. No longer were they the underdogs. They were the victors, the conquerors of a galaxy that had once thought of them as insignificant. But even as they celebrated, there were those who looked to the future with caution. The human race had achieved a remarkable feat, but there was a growing understanding that this victory was not the end, it was just the beginning. The galaxy was not just filled with peace and prosperity. There were dangers lurking in the shadows, and Earth had drawn the attention of powers far greater than the Imperium. President Elena Rivera addressed the nation from the steps of the Capitol, her face both proud and determined. "Today, we stand as a united world, stronger than we have ever been. But we must not let this victory blind us. The galaxy is vast, and we have just begun to explore what it has to offer. We will continue to stand together, to protect our home, and to ensure that the future of humanity is one of peace and strength." Her words resonated across the world. The victory over the Imperium had been a moment of triumph, but it had also been a wake-up call. Humanity had proven their strength, but now they had to prove they could handle the weight of the galaxy's attention. As Sarah stood on the bridge of the Dawn's Edge, the familiar hum of the ship beneath her feet was a constant reminder that their journey had only just begun. The galaxy was filled with countless possibilities, but also countless dangers. But she knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer the species others could ignore. They had fought hard to get here, and they would continue to fight to maintain their place in the stars. "We're ready," Sarah said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Whatever comes next, we'll be ready." And with that, the ship continued its journey, setting a course for the unknown. The galaxy was vast, but humanity had proven that it was more than capable of rewriting its destiny. The day the Deathworlders chose to stop pretending to be civilized had forever changed the course of history, and there was no going back. The galaxy would never forget the humans who had dared to defy expectations, and who had, against all odds, reshaped the universe in their image.